Welcome to this episode around vertical development, where I will look into how do you then actually develop. This is the first out of 2 episodes that are focusing on this because the topic is fairly large and there is a lot of different aspects around development. So I've chosen to make it into 2 of approximately 25 minutes each instead of 1 very large episode. But in this first episode, we're going to look into how do you then strengthen capacities within an existing stage. So how do you become better at a given capacity within where you operate already now? And also, where can you find inspiration to develop? But before doing that, I just want to do a recap around what has been covered in the series so far. So to take you back to the football analogy, the second podcast, I shared how you in sport typically grow in different divisions. And as you grow, you become better and better, but you generally build your capacities based on a foundation of skills you have, and then you become better, you develop new skills, and on those skills you build new ones. It's been the same when I've described the 5 leadership stages. So I started with the expert leader, where many leaders operate. And there are many reasons for a lot of leaders operating at the expert stage. One of them being that it's the first leadership stage, so everyone has to go through it. Secondly, if you don't have a lot of people around you incentivizing you to grow, or you have a personal desire to grow, then you probably will stay at that stage. When you then get to the next stage, you begin to become better at understanding your own development needs and take in critique, and gradually it becomes easier to grow to the higher stages. Still, most leaders will operate in the 2 first stages. Like in football, you will have much more, or in all sports, but like in sports, you will have much more players being at the amateur, semi-professional level than the very professional level. That doesn't mean that a leader operating at the expert is not professional, and they be perfectly fit for that role that they're holding. But as I have described in some of the episodes, if you really want to hold a senior leadership role, it is imperative that you have some of the qualities that you don't really develop until you get to at least the achiever and the catalyst stage. So if you have listened through the different podcasts, maybe you've identified some areas of development yourself, areas that you should focus on to develop further. Those needs may be that you just need to strengthen some capacities that you already hold, but you're not so strong in them, so you want to become better at managing them very, very solidly. Other times you may have identified that there is a capacity at the next stage you want to reach, and then the approach can to some extent be the same, which I'll come back to, but it is around identifying how you're then going to get to that, or how you're going to build that capacity inside yourself. So who can help you grow? Well, firstly, some people will have an incredible drive themselves, so they can to a high extent drive their own development. But most people would benefit hugely from different support in various ways. So one of the best support you can actually get is role models. It has to be said, you can have good role models and bad role models. Sadly, they are equally good at teaching you a certain behavior. So if you're surrounded with bad role models, you will have a tendency to begin to apply the same approach to different situations, and sadly not necessarily develop in a constructive way. On the other hand, if you have some good solid role models who demonstrate good ways of solving and addressing different behaviors or leadership challenges, then that can be an inspiration for you. And a role model doesn't have to be someone who is close to you. It could be a more senior person, it could be a famous person that you can observe. It can be someone that you just look up to in one way or another. Someone who has some of the traits that you want to develop in yourself. So to give you an example, you may want to become very good at communicating, so you have a desire to communicate in a more effective way, then you may in your organization have someone who's very good at communicating. They may do presentations, in an audience full of the entire organization, and they just captivate you every time that he or she is speaking in those events. Then observe what it is they're doing. Observe how they're doing, how they're talking, how they're articulating themselves, how their body language is. Are they walking around, engaging you? Are they withdrawing when it's not so interesting? Are they over here or are they there? How are they engaging you? And what is it in yourself that really makes that difference? Why is it they're so good for you? And when you begin to think about that, you can begin to replicate it because you have a live example of how it can be done in a way that really works for you, most likely also do it for a lot of other people. So role models are very good, and very often we can find some role models in our lives that we can look up to. Clearly, you can also get to a stage where it becomes more and more difficult to find role models that are really fit for developing you at that stage, and then some of the other support I will come into can be very good for you. The second type of support is your own line manager or your manager. They may not necessarily operate at a very high stage, they may operate at your stage, but what your manager can help you do is to identify areas of improvement, areas that you should focus on, because often a manager sees how you manage different situations and can help you point out areas of improvement. So a lot of big corporates today have development areas, has to be defined yearly, and then you know what you should work on. Some corporates will focus a lot on the horizontal development areas where you can drive the direction towards you want to vertical develop. Sometimes you need to ask more directly a manager, how can I become better at A, B, and C? And then the manager may be able to help you and say, I think you should do this or that, and even support you in your journey. So in many ways, back to the sports analogy, managers can almost be like your team players. You may play in a team, and some of your players are better than you. Some of them can help you grow. Some of them can give you advice for how to do things differently, and you may even observe them do it personally. Then there is the coaches. Coaches like executive coaches, which are typically more focused on helping executives grow, i.e. leaders growing in leadership, have a very strong supporting role in many people's development. So like in the sports world where the best always have coaches to develop, the same applies in leadership. And why is it the coach is so good? Well, the coach, firstly, to just set the scene around a coach. A coach is a neutral person. A coach is not better than you. They may in some areas have more experience than you. In other areas they may have far less experience than you. So it's not their experience, because they're not here to mentor you, they're here to coach you. And when you coach, you're not using your experience to guide another person. You're using a technique and a form that enables the coachee, i.e. the one who wants to grow, to begin to understand themselves better in a different way. Helps to identify new ways of doing things that are fit for that person. So it's not around telling you should do A, B, and C. It's much more around saying, you have this challenge. What have you done with it so far? Have that been successful? What could you do differently? What could you try off? What would you gain by doing it in that way? Then you may figure out you want to try something. You may come back to the coach, talk around how it went. It may not have been the most successful approach, and then you may try a different approach. Another way the coach can help a person grow is by providing some perspective. So because the coach will observe a coachee from a neutral point of view, they can observe ways of thinking, ways of acting, ways of articulating, and reoccurring patterns in a person. So the coach is not to judge, the coach is not to evaluate, the coach is not to make an evaluation of a person. The coach is there to help you, like a mirror, understand yourself better. And that is where the coach becomes much stronger in many ways than a leader will and family and friends will. Because when you speak with friends and family, you often will take in their input in their best intentions, but often with some hesitation too, because it is your friend or your partner or your mother or someone else who is giving you guidance right now. And there will always be an element of subjectivity that is difficult to carve out when you take in feedback from people you know well. The same from a leader. The leader may have an agenda. The leader may like you a lot, or they may not like you so much. So there is a little bit of a tension between a employee and a leader in most instances. And that tension at times can be very good. It can generate more performance from your part. But at times it can also be counterproductive for your development because you are not necessarily so receptive for the input that may be very valid from your manager, but still it can be difficult to take on board because it is your manager and you have some feelings towards that manager. The coach, on the other hand, is only part of your life for a very short period of time. It may be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, but it will not be 5 years. And typically it will not be at a personal level. So clearly you shouldn't be coached by someone you know. So typically you would be coached by a neutral coach. They won't really know you as a person. They can't observe you at work. The only thing the coach can do is to take on board what you are sharing with them, the way you share it with them, the way you talk about things, and then play it back for you. And sometimes getting played back, how you see things, how you do things, how you reflect upon things, can help you become wiser around who are you as a person. And as you get wiser about who you are as a person, you also begin to become much better at knowing yourself. That self-reflective capacity that I've spoken around in the previous episodes enables you to become more self-aware. And as your self-awareness grows, you begin to understand yourself better, your ways of being, your ways of thinking, your ways of acting. You can grow in many different areas, but ultimately you also become better at leading yourself. And as you become better at leading yourself, you also become more independent in your drive for development. And as you become good at leading yourself, eventually you also become good at master yourself, like the alchemist will do, that they can master even the different emotions and feelings and ways of thinking that they have in themselves. There is no need to reach the alchemist level to develop. The ambition can be to just move to the next stage because development takes time. But the coach can really, in many ways, help you do that development because they can help you identify strategies for your current challenges. So you may have a challenge and a strategy can help you overcome that. And as you learn that that strategy worked, then you may have a new focus area after. It has to be said that change and growth is not for everyone. My personal view is that everyone can grow, but not everyone wants to grow. And if you have a fixed mindset, like for instance the conformer, this is how I am, and this is how we are, and people who are different from us may be wrong, or at least not part of our group, then it can be very difficult to develop. There is not anyone in that conformer group that kind of pushes you to become different, to become unique, to get out of that box. But when you get to the expert stage, you begin to reach a stage where at least you are receptive for critique. Some leaders operating at the expert stage may have operated there for a very long period of time and may be in a situation where there is no one who can really push them out of that comfort zone that they are operating in. They may be running their own company and therefore they have no managers who can say you need to develop, or they may just have been in an organization for many years where there isn't a high focus on development. Getting such an expert to develop will probably also be difficult. But if you are in an organization where you have high focus on development and you have managers above that can exercise some influence on a given person, then I dare to say that all experts can be pushed towards developing themselves, because sometimes you need a push out of that area where you believe that you actually do it good enough to realize that there's so many other ways you can do the same things in, And you can gain so much more by doing it in new ways. Doesn't mean you have to scrap the old way. Like I've said several times, each capacity builds on the previous one, so you don't scrap the capacities you have as an expert, but you figure out that there are other ways of handling different leadership challenges, and they may actually be much more effectful in how you see leadership. Hence, you don't feel a need to use the ones you used when you operated at a lower stage. It also means that as you grow, especially when you get to the catalyst level, you've reached the stage where you have got to know yourself so well, your self-awareness is fairly high, and your drive to develop yourself has almost become a self-running engine in yourself. So the higher up you are in the leadership stages, the more natural the development becomes. As I touched upon when I covered the 2 highest stages, for them, learning becomes part of their life. So they never fall back in a chair and say, now I have reached my max and I can never become better. Despite they operate at so high stages, they continuously see room for improvement in themselves because they strive for the highest level of expertise in their leadership. Getting to know yourself and where you are today is pivotal in all development. If you look at the sports world, if you don't know that you're playing in a given league or division, how can you aspire to play in another or develop skills to become better? If you, for instance, are playing in assume you're playing tennis and you play in a fixed group of 12 people and you're the best among those 12 people and you never meet anyone else than those people, then you would probably go around in an isolated world and believe that the rest of your life that you are among the best tennis players. Only by getting that visibility that many others play much better than you can generate that drive for you to develop further and not be complacent because you already feel you are at the highest level. The disadvantage being in leadership is that some organization may operate with a leadership level that may be mostly dominated by maybe expert leaders and a few achievers. So if you operate in such an organization, you may believe that you operate at a very high level, but by understanding this framework, you can begin to understand that there are many other ways to lead that can give you better results and give you a different outcome that you're used to today. So that self-awareness around where you are, how you operate today is pivotal for your development. And when you begin to get that, you also begin to get the drive to develop yourself. And as you get that drive to develop yourself, you begin to see that development is really giving you a lot of additional. And that in itself can give you more motivation to continue to develop. Back to the point that co-creators and alchemists are self-driven in their leadership development journey. So let's get to the $1 million question. How do you develop? Well, it's actually fairly simple, but it takes time and it can be painful at times. So the first thing, if we take an example where you want to strengthen an existing capacity, let's assume that you are a leader. You may be operating at the expert stage. Maybe you are on your way towards becoming an achiever. So one of the things that you are required to do and can do, but not necessarily are very good at, is to provide constructive feedback. So you have reached the stage where you've realized that feedback is very often around giving a person something that they can use to grow, and has to be delivered in a certain form. Still, you dread it. You don't feel comfortable with it. So if you have it in that way, one of the most effective strategies that you can apply in changing behavior is the strategy which focuses around you observe what is your challenge. And as you have observed what your challenge is, you begin to analyze what is the root cause for you having this challenge. What is it that prevents you from doing things? Then you go into the strategizing. So you make a strategy for how to change that block, how you get down and begin to do the thing that you have observed up here that you're not really good at doing. And then eventually you do like an implementation plan for yourself, which is your action plan. And then you carry out your action and you try out a new approach for things. Then when you've done that, you go back to the observation and you look at how did it all go. And if it went well, you will repeat it and do it again and again and again, because changing human behavior takes time and a lot of repetition. And if the outcome was not so successful, you will, from the observation, begin to think about how can I do it differently. And then you analyze again, you do another approach, then you do a strategy for implementing that approach, and you try it off. So it's a circular movement, and it's a very impactful way of doing things, and it sounds very basic. However, it requires a lot of thoughts into understanding yourself. So back to the example with not feeling comfortable around providing feedback. It may be that inside you struggle with providing feedback because you have had a lot of bad experience yourself in receiving feedback. You have maybe had people who couldn't give you feedback in a constructive way. So for you, it's a no-go going into that feedback territory. You feel you're getting uncomfortable because it activates a lot of feelings in yourself. So beginning to understand that, the analysis part of what is it that drives it, can make you understand that when you are providing feedback to someone else, it's nothing to do with that. Just that understanding of yourself and the limitations in you can help you in this instance. There may be many other reasons for you not feeling comfortable. This is an example. Then you may make a strategy that you want to go out and try off. And you may want to try off providing this constructive feedback to either someone you know. So you may do a little bit of a role play, which can be very helpful to train your brain in doing things in a new way. Or you may identify the person where you have most likely of a success. Because why would you go for the worst case to start with? You want to have a successful experience that you can build more success on. Then you may start going out and provide this constructive feedback with the manager you have under you that you have to give feedback, where you are convinced that it will be best received. You may in your strategy also have planned for how you're going to deliver that strategy. So you may have thought about ways of doing it. You may have shared it with your manager. You may have shared it with your coach or someone else. My approach is this and that. And they would have helped you reflect upon that outcome. Is that necessarily the best? What can you expect from that outcome? And if you try another outcome, what could you expect from that? And that in the strategizing down in this area may have helped you do it in a slightly different way. So you may even go out and try your new approach around giving feedback in a way you've never given feedback before, because someone have helped you see feedback in a new light and help you identify new approaches that are fit for you, that you feel comfortable with. Then you try to go out and give that feedback, and it may go very well. Then you go back, you analyze, or you observe, and based on that observation, you analyze that it was a very, very good approach, but you needed to do a few adjustments, and then the wheel continues. So that is one way to change behavior. And as I just said previously, it takes time. And it can be painful, because sometimes you also have to reflect upon yourself. What is it in you that prevents you from doing a thing, or what is it that makes it uncomfortable for you? What is happening up here? What thoughts are running in your head? And that is what differs the higher stages from the lower stages, is that the lower stages don't reflect upon what thoughts are actually driving me. They're just reacting upon that unconscious thought that is telling them something and making them feel uncomfortable. The more you grow in leadership stages, the more you become conscious around what it is that prevents you. What is it? What voice is sitting in your back head and talking and instructing you? And the more you begin to identify that voice, the more you can begin to make it stop talking, because very often it's rooted in something in the past. So when you want to address an underlying challenge where you may have a block of doing something better than you do today, this can be a very effective way to do it. There could be many other examples of challenges where you want to become better, but the wheel around observing, analyzing, making a strategy and carry out the strategy is the same, irrespective of what the challenge may be. This was the first out of 2 episodes around how do you then vertically develop. In this episode, I've looked into how you strengthen a capacity within an existing leadership stage. In next week's episode, I'm going to look into how do you then develop to the next one if you want to operate at a higher stage than you currently do. I hope you found it interesting. Maybe you have a reflection or a commentary. Please leave it in the commentary field below. If you want to read more around vertical development and how you can develop, visit my homepage. And otherwise, I just hope to see you next week. Thank you very much and bye-bye.